Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Russ LeBlanc, your personal NEC consultant and code expert. In this video, I'm going to be discussing load calculations, specifically dwelling unit, lighting load calculations, and some changes proposed for the 2026 NEC. Okay, right off the bat, we're going to start with this one. Article 220 has a new name. It's now Article 120. And so it'll be located in Chapter 1 versus Chapter 2. So we'll have to get used to that, all new numbers. This is part of the reorganization of the NEC. You're going to see a lot more of this in the upcoming NEC edition. So something we're just going to have to get used to and deal with. New article numbers, new section numbers. Okay, as far as some real technical changes, you want to look at 120.5C. In 2023, it would have been 220.5C. As far as the floor area for each building shall be calculated from the outside dimensions of the building, dwelling unit, or other area involved. So we don't go and add the living room area to the dining room area, to the kitchen area, to the bedroom area. We don't do that. We just measure from the very outside dimensions, okay? No change there, but just pointing out how we do it. Now, for dwelling units, there are some changes. For dwelling units, the calculated floor area shall not include detached garages. All right, so that was added. Detached garages are specifically not included. Really just to clarify, I mean, in my mind, I'm thinking, well, that's not the dwelling unit anyways. It's a whole nother building. But there was some confusion because you might remember in the last code, they got rid of the references to garages. And so that meant that garages, an attached garage, was included. And so it was causing some confusion. So for this code cycle, they're clarifying detached garages are not included. Neither are open porches or unfinished areas that are not adaptable for future use as a habitable room or occupiable space. Not included in the floor area calculation. All right, there's a good example of a dwelling unit plus a detached garage. So when we are calculating the floor area of the dwelling unit, we do not include the floor area of that detached garage. However, for an attached garage like this one, we do include the floor area of the garage as part of the dwelling unit floor area. Okay, also, unfinished spaces like you see in this graphic here, they are included if that space is adaptable for future use as either a habitable room or an occupiable space. This one to me looks like it's almost ready for sheetrock, so I would absolutely include this one in the floor area as well. Now here comes a really big change. Really, really big change. It could have a huge impact on the size of a service or a feeder, for example, especially for multifamilies. 120.41, formerly 220.41, dwelling unit minimum unit load. For one families, two families, and multifamily dwellings, the minimum unit load shall not be less than, it's now 2 volt amps per square foot. It was previously 3 volt amps per square foot. That's a really big reduction. And it makes sense if you think about it, right? I started in the trade, gosh, more than 40 years ago. I hesitate to say that, but it was. And back then, we didn't have LED lighting. We had incandescent lighting. Incandescent lighting, right? And then, after time, compact fluorescents came out, and they were more efficient than certainly incandescent lighting. So you could get the same amount of light, but use less power. And now, more recently, we have LED lighting, and that has really gotten popular and has really taken off. And so LEDs use even less power than, say, fluorescents or compact fluorescents and incandescents. So it kind of makes sense that we're now able to lower this 3 volt amps per square foot for lighting down to 2 volt amps per square foot. And so that's a really significant reduction that we see there. Now, what's included in this now 2 volt amps per square foot unit load? It includes the following lighting and receptacle outlets. So it's not just for lighting. This 2 volt amps per square foot does include certain receptacle outlets. No additional load calculations are needed. Everything's built into the 2 volt amps per square foot calculation. It includes all general use receptacle outlets, 20 amps or less, including receptacles installed on the 20 amp circuits required for bathrooms and garages. It also includes receptacle outlets installed outdoors and in basements, garages, and accessory buildings. And all the required lighting outlets specified in 210.70, all of these items are included in this 2 volt amps per square foot calculation. Now, as far as the lighting load, right, that's the unit load. Now the lighting load, the minimum lighting load shall be determined using that 2 volt amps per square foot unit load and the floor area as determined in 120.5C for dwelling occupancies. And then motors rated less than 1/8 horsepower and connected to a lighting circuit are considered part of the minimum lighting load. An example of that might be a bathroom exhaust fan, right? It's a tiny little motor, probably on with the lights, very small load, so it's just part of the lighting circuit, no additional load calculation for that. Or a ceiling suspended paddle fan, like in a bedroom, for example. It's a pretty small load. It's probably on a lighting circuit. It may have a light kit on it. We're just going to say that's also part of the lighting load. No additional load calculation for those very small motors, really, is what they are, or an appliance. Now, this revision from 3 volt amps per square foot to 2 volt amps per square foot happened in several other sections in formerly Article 220, now Article 120. It also applies, in addition to the standard method, calculation for dwelling units, it also applies to the optional calculation for existing dwelling units and even for multi-family dwelling units. So this is a really impactful change. Let's do an example now and see how this can really affect the size of a service, for example, or a feeder. So for 2023, this is how the math would work out. If we use the 3 volt amps per square foot for a 2,000 square foot dwelling, and this is just one example, 2,000 square foot dwelling times 3 volt amps per square foot or feet, 6,000 volt amps. That was the lighting load for that 2,000 square foot dwelling. Now for 2026, that's a pretty significant change, right? It's still 2,000 square feet, but now we're multiplying by 2 volt amps per square foot instead of 3 volt amps per square foot. So now the lighting load is only 4,000 volt amps. That's a pretty big change right there. And when we look at multifamily dwellings, it's even a bigger change. So now we're going to look at a multifamily dwelling. It's going to be 40 units, 2,000 square foot each. Watch what happens now. So in 2023, the math would look like this. 2,000 square feet times 3 volt amps per square foot times 40 units, 240,000 volt amps. Now, let's compare that to 2026. And now, because we're using 2 volt amps per square foot instead of 3, we're only at 160,000 volt amps. That's a huge change right there. So you can see this could really have a big impact on the size of a service or a feeder that you're required to install. It could be a really big change. Now, as far as any feeder or service demand factors, those still apply. And in fact, there's really no change. When it comes to the demand factors, there's really no change other than the section numbers might be different. So the lighting load can still be added to the load specified for small appliance circuits and laundry circuits, and those are 1,500 volt amps for each of those circuits. And then have the demands from formerly table 220.45. Now it's going to be renumbered to 120.45. And those demands have not changed. There they are. The first 3,000 volt amps still get taken at 100%. the next portion, the next 117,000, if you will, from 3001 VA to 120,000 volt amps, that's the next 117,000 volt amps. That portion could get taken at 35%, and then the remainder gets taken at 25%. No change in those demands at all. Now, because there might be some concern of using that 2 volt amps per square foot to also determine the number of branch circuits and then ending up with fewer branch circuits, there's another change we're going to look at. And it's this one. 120.13 was added so that we're not going to be installing fewer branch circuits. Maybe we can install a smaller service or a smaller feeder, but as far as the number of branch circuits, that's not going to change. For calculating the minimum number of branch circuits required in dwelling units, the minimum unit load still going to be 3 volt amps per square foot. So however many branch circuits you were installing previously, still going to be using 3 volt amps per square foot to calculate how many branch circuits you need. So for an example, if we go back to that 2,000 square foot dwelling times the unit load of 3 volt amps per square foot, 6,000 volt amps, that's the number we use. 6,000 volt amps is the value we use to determine the number of branch circuits. We don't use 4,000 volt amps, right? 4,000 volt amps could be used to calculate the size of the feeder or service, but not calculating number of branch circuits. So for this example, we'll ask how many 15 amp branch circuits. You might install 20s, that's fine, or a combination of 15s and 20s. Doesn't matter. Just one example of many. In this one, we'll do 15 amp circuits. So a 15 amp circuit at 120 volts provides 1,800 volt amps per circuit. If we have 6,000 volt amps, we divide by 1,800 volt amps per circuit. Math works out to 3.33 circuits. Can't have 3, we got to go up. This is not a fraction of an amp. It's a fraction of a circuit. No such thing as a third of a circuit breaker. So we have to install 4 as a minimum, 4 branch circuits as a minimum, and that is per 210.11a. The number of branch circuits is based on the rating of the branch circuit along with the load calculation. So we have 6,000 volt amps and a 15 amp circuit. So we need 4 15 amp circuits. Thank you for watching. Look forward to seeing you in the next video. Keep watching those videos. And as always, russellblank.net for more information.